Hello, everybody. David Shuster here. Donald Trump has opened up a controversial new front in his economic war. In this one, he's targeting U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The Fed, which sets bank interest rates, is supposed to be independent of politics, and under the law, Powell cannot be fired. But Trump wants control, and the Trump threats to find a way to dump Powell have prompted this.
President Trump's continued attacks on Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his attempts to oust him, sending the markets into another deep dive.
Stocks, as you can see on your screen, plunging following the president's comments amid Powell's refusal to cut interest rates. He called the Fed chair a major loser on Truth Social and once again demanded that Powell immediately take action.
Criticizing the Fed chair is one thing. Lawmakers across the spectrum through the years have taken issue with Fed policy. But actively trying to get the Fed chair fired, as Donald Trump is now reportedly doing, is something entirely different. And Trump's actions cut against the entire 113-year history of the Federal Reserve.
But the Federal Reserve is an independent institution. It was set up that way on purpose. And so now you have traders and investors worried that the president is trying to meddle into monetary policy. Now, this is nothing new for the president. In his first term, he also tried to signal that he wanted to remove Jerome Powell. But ultimately, for investors and traders, the Federal Reserve acts sort of as a safety net, a way to sort of check and balance the U.S. economy. And we know, look at what happened during COVID. The Federal Reserve was instrumental in bringing down inflation, and many economists warn that this trade war will only make prices go higher, prices increase. And so the Federal Reserve will be key in trying to manage those high prices for everyday U.S. consumers.
The Federal Reserve and its independence were created by Congress in 1913. Under the law, a Federal Reserve chair can only be fired for cause, as in personally committing a crime. Policy mistakes, say if interest rates are set too low or too high while frustrating, are not cause for termination. And Powell has said that if Donald Trump tries to remove him, Powell will not leave. This dispute could eventually, conceivably, go to the U.S. Supreme Court, but in the meantime, the intensity of the Trump threats and insults, including calling Powell a loser, well, that has all unnerved investors around the globe. And even before Trump opened fire on Powell, investors were down on the U.S. economy given Trump's tariffs and unpredictability.
At the meantime, you have the backdrop here of an S&P 500, the worst performance since an inauguration since 1928, and the Dow has had its worst April since 1932. So there's a feeling that the president is looking for someone to blame for what is the damage in the markets and the economy from his own trade war, and that is Jerome Powell.
And to be clear, he's the Fed chair, but the Fed is, it's their 10 members on the federal board.
There are other people who vote as well. So
right.
If you change or remove Jerome Powell, you could still have a Fed that doesn't cut interest rates. But this is a lot of optics and a lot of insults flying here, not back and forth, but just in one direction. And you saw investors yesterday alarmed selling the dollar, stocks and bonds. They're calling it the Sell America trade. Ironically, the president's trying to return Buy America. Investors are looking at the chaos of the United States and saying, we're going to sell that.
The chaos also comes from the claims being made by the Trump White House and the conflict with reality. A few weeks ago, when Donald Trump announced his global tariffs on what he called Liberation Day, the Trump team insisted that the move would immediately spark dozens of countries to reach out to the Trump White House and agree to new trade deals with the United States. But as of this video, not a single deal has been reached. Japan, which is a top U.S. economic ally, reportedly sent their negotiators to Washington, D.C. and met face-to-face with the Trump team. But according to several reports, the United States could not state specifically what Donald Trump wanted from Japan and then kept changing the Trump demands. As a result, the negotiations keep stalling.
Over the weekend, we know that there were negotiations going on, and even until last week, between Japan and the United States. But investors and traders aren't seeing any tangible deals being made, and that's concerning for them because they see Japan as an ally, as a key trading partner. And I have an analyst that I spoke to a little bit earlier who said that if Japan and the U.S. can't come to a deal, what does that mean for the dozens of other countries that are supposed to be negotiating with the United States around this trade war?
In other words, the trade war, which pushed markets down from the start, is not generating any clarity or predictability, even between the United States and its closest allies. As a result, global investors see ongoing chaos and keep selling their investments in the United States, including in the US dollar, which until now had been viewed as the safest and most predictable currency in the world. And keep in mind that in January 2025, before Donald Trump took office, the US economy was the envy of the world. The stock market had reached all-time highs, the U.S. housing market was at an all-time high, inflation was less than 3%, unemployment was at about 4%, the dollar was generating a 5% annual return risk-free, the gross domestic product was at 3%, and now, thanks to Trump, the dollar, which usually rises amidst tariffs, is collapsing. Foreign governments are dumping U.S. assets, inflation is rising again, unemployment is rising, the housing industry is dropping, GDP is falling, and the U.S. stock markets are tanking. In U.S. history, there have been 11 days when the Dow dropped more than 1,000 points. 4 of those days are since Donald Trump's Liberation Day. And Trump's response now is to attack the Federal Reserve chair, which investors say could hurt the United States indefinitely.
If we were to see the president threaten the independence of the Fed as an institution like that, you're really talking about the haven value and the reserve status of particularly treasuries and the US dollar being eroded very significantly in very rapid fashion, probably forever, because once that institutional trust has been demolished, it's almost impossible for it to be rebuilt again over any sort of realistic time period.
In other words, Donald Trump isn't just shredding the U.S. economy now, he is damaging it for years. Many of us have long tried to understand what motivates Donald Trump and whether he's a Russian asset or insane or some combination. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. Our economy is in free fall, America's standing in the world is tanking, and the Trump actions are going to hurt all of us. By the way, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts recently ripped a Trump-defending business news host to her face on live television.
You know what? Instead of just mouthing off about what you think is happening, actually present some evidence. And let's look at the evidence. Let's let the other side come in and question that evidence. But you don't just get to lip off and say, and therefore the king gets to wave his magic wand and say, off with your head.
Doesn't the government determine where federal tax dollars go?
Well,
and so they're allowed to decide.
Law, do you think they have a big bushel basket of money and they just say, you good looking, you will have money. You not so good looking, you're going to have to go hungry for a while.
Check out that video at the link below. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.